Happy Resurrection Sunday. When we talk about resurrection, we're talking about the fact that Jesus rose again from the dead. And that really is what we're celebrating together this Easter Sunday. You know, one of the things that Jesus' resurrection reminds us of is God's amazing power. God even has power over death. But you know, even though we serve a God who has so much power, sometimes we can be afraid. Sometimes we don't do what we know God wants us to do because we're afraid of what might happen to us, or maybe we're afraid of what other people might think. Well, this week, Mr. Sebrell is going to share a Bible story with us about a man who was afraid and how God helped him.
Hello, students. I hope you all are doing well. I'll be praying for you and your families during this time, but today we're going to be talking about Gideon and how God used him as a young man to do a mighty work there with the Israelites. Some of you may like to play sports, have fun. Maybe it's for a school or maybe for just with your friends. But sometimes we get afraid to be picked last. I know I played basketball coming up and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed having time with my brothers. I played for my school, but also just with my friends. But sometimes, you know, when it came to people that may have been better than me, I was scared to get picked last on the team. And it's no fun when you say, hey, I don't want him, or I don't want her. No, you take him. That's no fun, right? But then there's other times when you might be the best player or you might be a really good player and people are like, hey, I want that person on my team. I choose them. No, I want them. When they're fighting over you, it's more fun that way, right? But it's no fun being last. The only time I think that it's okay is when we're on God's team. It doesn't matter if you're first or it doesn't matter if you're last because you're chosen by God to be on his team. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today with the story of Gideon. The Israelites, they couldn't make up their mind who they wanted to serve. Are we going to serve God or are we going to serve Baal? They didn't know what they wanted to do. And in the end, they decided to choose the idols. They worship idols. And this sin is called idolatry. Because of their idolatry, God took his hand of protection from them. He wasn't wrapped around them like he once was before. And they entered into bondage. When they repented, the judges would come and they would rule over them. It was almost like they couldn't obey unless somebody was watching them at all times. Isn't God always watching us? Even when your parents aren't watching you or your teachers or somebody that's in charge of you is not watching, shouldn't you still obey? The answer is yes, because God always sees us. The Israelites had to learn that lesson, and this is something that we have to learn as well. God took his hand of protection off of them, and the Midianites came in, and they were a wicked and a very evil people. They were the worst of all. Some of the things that the Midianites did to them was to take all of their things. They would destroy their houses, destroy all their goods. All the stuff that they didn't want, they would destroy. They didn't care about anyone except themselves. Keep in mind that the Israelites, they lived in caves, right? So their homes were destroyed because that was some of the stuff that the Midianites would destroy. They lived in bondage for 7 years before they even repented. Just think about that. Some of you guys are 7 years old. Think about how long you've been living. They were in bondage for 7 years. This is something not just they went through a short period of time. This is what they went through every day of their lives, okay? So just think about that. This story is really interesting. So finally, after those 7 years when they repented, God found a young man, and his name was Gideon. And this is where our story is going to start today. So there was a young man named Gideon, and he was the son of Joash. Gideon was hiding in the winepress, and he was threshing grain. Now, threshing grain is when you take grain or you take wheat and you separate all the bad parts so you can use it to make food and to help them to make bread and to make things that they would eat, right? So he was threshing this grain, but he was in a winepress. Usually those are places hidden away. They were underground most of the times, right? So why was he hiding? One day a stranger came in, and he thought it was a Midianite. Gideon said, who is this? He wasn't sure, but it was actually an angel. That angel came to him and said to Gideon, mighty man of valor. But wait a minute. Gideon was hiding away in a winepress. That doesn't sound like he was a mighty man of valor. Valor is like bravery. So if he was brave, why was he hiding, right? So do you think Gideon looked like someone brave? I don't think so. But you know what? God saw something different than what Gideon saw at the time. When we think of somebody brave, we think of like the soldiers that are fighting. We think of warriors that are ready to go to fight, right? But God saw his heart, and he saw that someone that he could use. But Gideon's faith was weak. Gideon had to be tested to be sure that he was ready to serve God. We shouldn't be like that. Our faith needs to be strong. We need to put our faith in God so we can understand and allow God to use us in our lives. And we have to have our faith to believe that God is going to do whatever he said that he's going to do, and he can use us to do anything. All right, so the angel of the Lord came, and he told Gideon, you are going to deliver the people from the hand of the Midianites. But Gideon wasn't ready. He was still afraid, and he had doubt. He said, me? Why me? He didn't understand. This reminds me of another man in the Bible named Moses. When God chose Moses to do what he wanted him to do, Moses said, but God, I can't talk. I can't speak well. They won't believe me. What am I even going to say, right? But Moses didn't ask for a sign. He obeyed God. But Gideon asked for a sign. He wasn't sure. He said, I need something to prove that what the angel was saying was true. So the angel told Gideon to take the meat, take bread, and take broth, and put it on a rock. And he was going to pour the broth over that meat and that bread, right? Most things that are wet really don't catch on fire. But in this case, it did. Because that's what the angel was wanting to happen. All of a sudden, the angel touched it with his staff and poof, it all went up into flames. So at that point, Gideon knew. He said, I am in the presence of an angel. But still, he was afraid. He thought he was going to die. God said, you're not going to die because I have a plan for you. You're going to deliver the people from the hand of the Midianites. But first, before you do that, I want you to take care of the sin that's in your own family. There's a way that we can clear up idols and sin that are in our lives as well. Instead of watching TV or playing video games, how about taking 5 minutes of that time and giving it to God? We can use that time to pray. We can use that time to read our Bibles and give that time to God in a better way. These idols of Baal, they were in his father's backyard. So when God said, take these sins away from out of your family, he wanted him to get the idols from his father's backyard. God told him to go and to destroy and to build an altar instead of having those idols in the backyard. But Gideon didn't go right away, right? Should we obey right away? Especially when our parents tell us to do something, we say, well, they didn't say do it right now, but they shouldn't have to say that. They shouldn't have to say do it right now. You should obey right away. That's what God wants us to do as well. So he went, but he went at nighttime. He took 10 friends with him. I would have loved to go with Gideon. I think it would have been a good time serving the Lord and destroying those idols that those people had, that his father had in the backyard. Wouldn't that be exciting to you? To knock all of those things down would have brought joy to me because I was doing something that the Lord told me to do, right? So they destroyed those idols and they took some wood and they made a sacrifice to God. But do you think the people of that town, the Israelites, were excited about what they found in the morning when they woke up? I don't think so. But you know, everyone already knew it was Gideon because of his good testimony for the Lord. But they didn't hurt him. The people who had the idols in their backyard, they said, well, these idols are strong. How can a young man get away with defeating them? So they didn't hurt him. That was one of the reasons that they didn't hurt him. So Gideon, he obeyed. So he asked, God told him that he wanted him to fight, right? To deliver the people from the Midianites. So to fight, he had to have an army. So he asked for volunteers for his army, but before he narrowed his army down, Gideon asked for another sign from the Lord. He still wasn't sure if this is what God wants me to do. So he said, Lord, if you take this sheepskin or this fleece and I lay it on the ground, I want you to make it wet, but keep the ground dry. And then I'll know you've called me. So that was Gideon. He was testing the Lord. He wanted the Lord to prove, okay, this is what I want you to do. So the next morning when Gideon got up, sure enough, the fleece was wet and the ground was dry. It should have been enough before when the angel told him, the angel gave him a sign and he told him what to do. But Gideon's faith was weak. Actually, he shouldn't even have needed a sign in the first place. He should have just trusted God when the angel came. But God was really patient with him, the same way God is patient with us. So Gideon asked again for another sign after that. He said, Lord, make the fleece dry this time and the ground wet. And again, what did the Lord do? He did what he asked. God had done the fleece wet and the ground dry, and the fleece dry and the ground wet. And Gideon says, all right, Lord, I know you've called me. And he started for the battle. When I think of Gideon, it reminds me of David, someone who was a little rough around the edges. People saw David as a shepherd boy, but God saw David as a king. You know, when I think of students in this class and in the classes of all of this church here, some of them are tall, some of them are small. You guys are silly, you like to smile and laugh, but that's what I see. I can't see what God sees. I don't know what God sees. But I hope that you have a desire in your hearts to serve God and to join God's team. So let's all rally together and become a part of God's team.
Thank you, Mr. Sebrell, for that great challenge. You know, there's no reason for us to fear when we're on God's team. We can trust him and obey him no matter what happens. I am thankful, though, that God is patient with us, just like he was with Gideon. He remembers that we're weak, and he helps us to be strong. Remember today that Jesus rose again from the grave. What an amazing and powerful God we have. And let's all thank God that Jesus died and he rose again for you. I'll see you next week. Have a great week. I'll be praying for you.